What up, y'all? Welcome back to another video, and in this one we are going to be talking about how to set up a Django project. And I say setting up a Django project because we actually aren't going to be talking about Django itself too much as far as, views, serializers, migrations, all of that stuff. Not so much that, more so just the structure of, organizing your code, managing dependencies, dealing with settings across multiple environments, linting, testing, logging, Dockerization, deployment, pretty much all of the stuff around the application or business logic, because I don't see too much content around that, and well, I thought it would just be a cool little tutorial. So let's just go ahead and get started and jump right in. So I'm going to start by just creating a blank Django project. So I'm going to navigate to where I have all my projects on my computer, and that is desktop in a folder called projects. And the first thing that I always do is use Django admin. And by the way, I assume that you have like a basic understanding of Django if you're watching this tutorial. Probably not the best series to watch if this is your very first introduction to Django, unless you just want to, stick around and hang out with us. That's cool too. But anyways, Django admin, you already know how to start a project. Now, typically what you want to name your project right off the bat, and this is going to create a folder with the same name, is, whatever your application is, like pudding website or, bacon or whatever. However, what I do is no matter what I actually want to call my project, whenever I push it up to GitHub and, share it with the world, I always kick it off by naming it project at this stage right here. Now, you're going to see why I did that in just a second. However, just note that this is going to create a folder called project. However, I don't want the name of my actual project to be project. So right now, I'm just going to rename that. And the way that you can rename things right in the terminal is just basically move project to the new name of the folder. So I'm going to call that directory core tutorials. So why did I just create a folder with all this stuff in it and then I just renamed it right after? Well, check it out. Go ahead and open this up in any IDE of your choosing. And I'm going to be using PyCharm. All right, so check it out. I opened this directory in my IDE, and nested under it is still this folder right here called project. And also, the reason I created this by default and then renamed it is because when you rename it, only this changes, nothing else. And I say that because if you look at how the rest of the project is set up, it's set up exactly how I want, with all of these like core settings nested under project. And Django also sets up a couple other things. You see it says project right here, and I believe if you go to your settings, there's some other things like the root URL configuration is project.urls. It basically sets everything up like I want it to, nesting everything under project while allowing me to keep the top level folder exactly as I want. But either way, won't dwell on that too much. What do we do next? So the very first thing that I do right after this is I create my gitignore file. So .git ignore, there we go. And the reason I do this off the bat is because I like to push up my project to GitHub pretty early, even if I'm just working on it myself, just because, I don't know, GitHub's a nice tool to manage code. And there have been a lot of times where I forgot to do this gitignore, like maybe I'd add the readme or something, then push it up. And then a bunch of my files that I wanted to ignore are like accidentally committed or pushed up. And I'm like, okay, how do I remove my project files from Git but still keep them locally, and yada yada. So moral of the story is just go ahead and add your gitignore super quick. And like I said, I just copy over the most recent gitignore from my previous Django projects. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I know you guys didn't see where I just copied that, but I'm going to be sharing this on GitHub, so you don't really have to create all of this line by line. And I'm not going to be going through this line by line because what this gitignore file is basically a template that I found for Python or Django projects or something. And then I just added a few things of my own, but this is pretty much standard where any Django project, as long as I add this, it like covers like 99% of what I needed to. Maybe we'll add some other things, you know, in the future, but for right now, this is fine. So like I said, by the time you're watching this will be on GitHub, but yeah, there you go. Let's go ahead and hop on to the next stage, which is creating a README file. So I'm gonna close this for now, just create a new file, and I'm gonna call it README now. A lot of you are probably familiar with Markdown. However, what I'm going to be using is an RST extension. So readme.rst, and what RST is it's very similar to Markdown actually, but it stands for restructured text. And the differences between restructured text file and a Markdown file is that restructured text has some benefits when it comes to writing technical documentation. And we're going to be taking a look at some of those benefits later on. But for right now, we don't even have a project, so there isn't too much that we can do with the README. I'm just gonna add some quick placeholder text in here for now, and I'll say project setup. And if you aren't familiar with any of the syntax, don't worry, just add some equal signs on the line under that. Again, we just wanna add a placeholder for now since, I don't know, it just feels weird being empty. And I'll just say project setup instructions here. All right. So what is this equals? You know, what do we do after here? Don't worry about it for now. We're going to be hopping back into this, looking at restructured text in much more detail whenever we need it. But for right now, I just kind of want to skim through a lot of this. And all right, so we got two files. It's probably good to push up to GitHub now. But before we do, let's go ahead and just move on, install some other tools that we need. The first one that I want to talk about is poetry. All right, now whenever you type in Python poetry, you're going to be taken to a site like this, and just go ahead and follow the, let's see, where is the installation? Okay, if you go to, what was that, introduction, and you just find installation, then it's going to give you the most up-to-date installation instructions, and you can just follow this depending on whatever your system is. Again, don't want to dwell on this too much. I'm sure you guys can figure out how to install it if you haven't already. And also, I just wanted to say that you should be following the latest rather than, you know, whatever I show in this video. But anyways, what is poetry? Probably a good thing to figure out before we start installing this. So poetry is a tool that allows you to do, well, quite a few things. It includes managing dependencies. It allows you to run your project in a virtual environment. It actually has a lot of other features, and we're going to be covering those kind of as we need them. However, moral of the story right now is that go ahead and make sure you have poetry installed. And once you do, move my terminal around a bit, you can verify that you have it installed just by running poetry version. And all right, we got poetry 1.1.11 looking good. So, how should I put this? So, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can kind of think of poetry right now is the NPM of Python, or it's kind of like pip on steroids in a way. I don't know. It's a pretty unique tool, but the first thing that we want to do, and why I called it the NPM of Python, is just like we do NPM init, we can do poetry in it. However, instead of creating a package.json file, what this is going to do is it's going to create a pyproject.toml file. So it's going to be a little interactive guide, and we'll just go with the defaults now. Package name, core tutorials, yeah, version looks good. Author, beautiful. License, for license we can actually type in MIT. That might be the only thing. Okay, and also for the compatible Python versions, instead of Python 3.9, I want to do Python 3.10. And would I like to, no. All right, we can put no right here because I want to show you how to do this separately. But really, that's all you need to fill out. Just make sure you have MIT for license in 3.10, or actually whatever version of Python you want. Nope, I don't want to do any of this. Do you confirm generation? Yes. All right, beautiful. So what exactly did we just do right there? Well, as you can see, we now have this pyproject.toml file. So, okay, what is a pyproject.toml file? So let me pull this up and show you so you can see. All right. So PyProject.toml, if you've never seen it before, again, I don't mean to be making all these like JavaScript comparisons, but I do know a lot of my viewers are familiar with JavaScript and NPM, so I figure it might be useful. For right now, you can kind of think of this as package.json, even though I don't want a lot of people to be yelling at me because it's not like a direct equivalent. Just right now, for something to compare it to, it's, you know, probably a decent comparison. But we can really see the best description right here, which is this file contains build system requirements and information which are used by pip to build the package. So basically just that. It contains system requirements needed to build our project, basically. So what are the requirements or dependencies for our project? It's kind of the quick and dirty of it. And again, there's more to this file than just listing what dependencies you need. But for now, we'll just stick with that since that's kind of one of the main features of this file. Features of this file? Attributes? I don't know, however you say it. All right, so we can see that right now Python is a dependency. We got some information about our project. Beautiful. Now, the next thing that we're gonna wanna do is I'm gonna run a command to specify some additional packages that our project is gonna require. So we're gonna require, let's see, I know a couple off the bat, I can't remember them all. Django, Django REST framework, Django filter, you know, a couple other things. So in order to add those as dependencies, you can write poetry, add, and let's see the ones I remember. Django REST framework, make sure I spelled that correctly. We're actually gonna be using Postgres, so the package for that is PSYCOPG2. I don't even know how to pronounce that. And then, all right, Django filter. There's some other ones, but we'll be adding those later. It's actually probably better that way since, you know, I'm just not showing you how to add everything at once. Of course, as you're developing a project, you realize that there's some other dependencies you need later on and can add them. So either way, I'm just gonna go ahead and hit enter right now. And when I do, what poetry is going to do, you see a couple of things. So, all right, let's see if we can get some prompts. All right, Python 3.9 not supported. Trying to find a compatible version, creating a virtual environment. That's interesting. And then, okay, it looks like it's going out and grabbing those dependencies and installing them. All right, so that's pretty cool. So now let's hop back in our IDE and check out our PyProject.toml, and we can see that Poetry did a couple things. It added those dependencies to this file, and it also created this poetry lock file. Huh, this is interesting. I didn't see this before. So what exactly happened here? Well, check it out. Whenever we ran this command, poetry add, what it did is it not only added these dependencies to our PyProject.toml file, but it actually, kind of in the background, it ran another command right after, and that was to install them. So why did it do both at once, and why would we ever need this command if poetry add kind of like runs it together? Well, whenever you just need to add a new package to your project or dependency, whatever you want to call it, then you can run poetry add and it runs both. However, for any other developers working on this project, whenever they pull this down from GitHub, they don't actually need to add these again because they're already added to PyProject.toml. They just need to go ahead and install those packages. Okay, so they would probably run poetry install instead of poetry add, and that is correct. But again, what is this poetry lock file doing? So whenever this poetry install command is ran, let me pull this down a little bit. Whenever this command is ran, if there already is a poetry lock file, then the developer is going to install these exact versions specified in this poetry lock file. Now, if this poetry lock file does not exist, let's pretend that it doesn't exist, although I'm not going to delete it right now, but let's just pretend it doesn't exist and a developer ran this poetry install. What would happen is that poetry would read in the dependencies from this PyProject.toml file. Hey, actually, There are cars beeping outside right now. If that's like too annoying in the video, then let me know and I'll cut them out. But otherwise, I never actually did this where I actually want to see how loud that honking is. And if it's fine, then I'll just kind of keep rolling with it. But yeah, let me know. And anyways, let's get back on track here. So if you run poetry install and there's not already a poetry lock file, then it's going to go ahead and resolve all these dependencies and generate this poetry.log file. So short summary, pyproject.toml is really just a list of what packages your project needs, and then poetry.lock is almost like the final source of truth, stating exactly which versions each of those packages are going to be included to ensure that everyone ends up with the exact same dependencies. Because even if two developers have the same dependencies, but they have like a minor version different than each other, these are some of the most tricky bugs to track down, because that's when you get into, well, it's working on my computer, but not yours. So as much as you can, we want to end up with every single environment, production, local, all of the different developers with the exact same packages to kind of prevent a lot of these surprises. So we can actually run poetry install right now. And when you do, it's pretty interesting because it says, okay, recreating this virtual environment, and then it's trying to install everything again. And that's kind of weird because, well, just like a minute ago, I added everything and it seemed like it was installing it then. And now I'm running poetry install kind of just to show you, and it seems like it had to reinstall all those. I don't know, it's not sounding too efficient. So check it out. By default, Poetry is going to create its own virtual environment, which is great because it does that to keep things isolated from your own system. In other words, whenever we install these dependencies, it's nice to have them isolated and not install on like my Mac, you know? So Poetry is always going to try to create a virtual environment and install the dependencies there. However, it gets a little bit tricky sometimes, as you just saw, and I actually had some issues with the past just by running it straight up. And that was because it ended up, I can't remember exactly what happened because, well, truthfully, it was like quite a ways ago when I was running into these issues. But it was something like I had too many environments or I had trouble switching between the virtual environments. Like I said, I can't remember. However, lucky for us, there was a much better method that I found. Not really that I found, just, I don't know, was reading about on their documentation. And that's this. If you go ahead and create your own virtual environment, then whenever you run Poetry commands, then what Poetry is going to do is it's going to automatically detect that you're already in a virtual environment, and it's just going to use that one. So let's just go ahead and do that in PyCharm. And okay, so I'll show you how to do it in PyCharm. If you go down to your project and project interpreter, if you click this little gear, you can click add, and we just want to create a new virtual environment. And I'm not sure how to do it in the other IDEs, but I assume that a lot of you are familiar with this. So in PyCharm, this is how you do it, and this looks okay. And okay, so now we can see that we have this new virtual environment, and really that's all that we need to do for the time being. Like I said, now whenever we run Poetry install, then it's going to detect that new virtual environment. Actually, I think this may have, okay, so I'm actually I need to close that tab specifically. All right, so I had a little mistake there. I was already kind of shelled into the wrong location, not in my virtual environment, but in PyCharm at least, make sure that you actually close out of this tab specifically. Then when you reopen it, you should see this little prompt right here that says pretty much an indication that you are now in your virtual environment. And now I can demonstrate what I wanted to, which is installing those packages. And the cool thing is it doesn't say now creating a new virtual environment. It looks like everything is just happening in the one that was already created. So that's pretty dope. And now let me wait till this is done installing. And I'm actually just going to close out and try to do that one more time because I want to demonstrate one thing, and that is now whenever you install it, it's going to say, hey, popping back into your virtual environment using that. I see that you tried to reinstall it. You already had all of these installed, so nothing needed, all good to go. So again, that's just something I found was much more useful than to have Poetry kind of try to manage these different virtual environments on its own. But I did want to show it to you this way and kind of like do it the, I don't want to say bad way, but the alternative way first, just to demonstrate some of those nuances that you might run into if you don't create your own virtual environment. All right, so now let's just go ahead and try to run this project. And I got this little button in my IDE and check it out. So here, let me move this over here. It'd be easier to see. All right, so it says whenever we click that, all right, it actually looked like things are working. And let me pop this open and just make sure that, all right, so it looks like things are running correctly. However, so the first thing I see is we get this little migration warning. So we have to deal with that. So let me go ahead and stop this. And another thing that I want to point out is that even though things appear to be working, decently, we really don't want to be running our project using the IDE. And the reason for this is we want everything to go through Poetry. And by that, what I mean is whenever you run this project, we want it to run on Poetry, and not only our local environment, but other developers' environment. And in production, whenever we Dockerize everything, we basically want everything to run through Poetry because Poetry can keep everything consistent, which is great because, like I said, we don't want any surprises, at least not when it comes to programming. Now, before we see how to run this project in Poetry, let's just go ahead and talk about the syntax for running, well, anything using Poetry. So anytime you want to run something in Poetry, you type Poetry run, and then after is basically the command you would normally type. So to run a Python script is just Python, and then, whatever the name of the Python file is. And for example, let's say you're running PyTest. Instead of just running PyTest straight up, you can do Poetry run, PyTest, yada yada. But basically just remember that the syntax is Poetry run and then your command. So the command to run the app is Python run, actually, what is it? Python manage.py run server. There you go. And actually, this is ironically a pretty good demonstration of the fact that I have trouble remembering these commands sometimes. So I believe it's Poetry run Python manage.py run server, and okay, so this looks like it works. Still getting those migration issues, but let me just pop this open, and this was the new tab right here. Okay, so apparently we can run it this way as well, but well, we did have that one issue where I forgot exactly the command. So let me just go ahead and take another look at that. Okay, Poetry run Python manage.py run server. Okay, so I can probably remember this command going forward. However, I do know that there are a few other commands that we're going to be using quite often for like creating super users, running migrations, running tests. And well, even though I could probably remember this command, trying to remember all of those, the exact syntax for them, it's going to get pretty confusing. So one thing that I know that I can do is I could probably create like some Google Doc and paste all my commands in there. And then whenever I need one, I'll just copy it over and paste it in this terminal. However, it doesn't feel like the best way, to be honest. It doesn't even sound like the best way. So a better method, let me clear out my tabs right here. A better method is creating a Makefile. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. It's called Makefile. And okay, looks like it already has an icon. So, whoa, what the heck is a Makefile though? So Make is a tool used a lot in compiling software, and it already comes with your system. It's a Linux tool, but actually the easiest way that we can probably understand what this Makefile is kind of just to jump right in. So this file is going to be made up of something called targets, and under a target, you have your recipe right there. So you can think of a target as kind of like the function name, and the recipe, it just doesn't have to be one line. It could be multiple lines. You can kind of think of it like a function body, although a lot of people familiar with Make are like, this isn't a function, whatever. But we'll see exactly what we can do with it in just a bit. However, before typing an actual useful make command, I do want to mention one other thing, and that is another syntax, and that is to the right of your target, you may see something called prerequisites. And prerequisites are kind of like triggers that when the prerequisites change, it can cause the recipe to be reran. And I mentioned this last because we're actually not going to be using those prerequisites right now, and I don't want to throw too many things at you guys. But I do want to just mention it because they're pretty cool in that Make can detect changes in those prerequisites and keep track of whenever it needs to run this recipe again, all automatically. So it's a very efficient way that you can, run complex commands or rerun complicated build processes and only rebuild the parts of your project that are necessary. So it makes your build process a lot more efficient. But like I said, don't really worry about it right now. We'll be digging into those later on when we start Dockerizing everything. Just didn't want you guys to get thrown if you see this, little syntax looking at any make documentation or anything. So anywho, let's just go ahead and make an actual useful command right now. And in order to make a make target or function, command, whatever you want to call it, type in the name of it, and this can be any name that you want. I'm just going to call mine run server because what we are going to be doing is using it as a shorthand for this command right here. All right, so I couldn't remember if it was poetry run python run or poetry run python manage.py run server, but lucky for me, now I don't have to remember the syntax at all, because anytime that I want to run this command, all I have to do is run, let me clear this out. All I have to do is run make, and then just make sure you guys can see, make run server. So again, for a Makefile, just make sure that you're in that directory, run make command, and then the name of your target. Now, whenever you do this, you're gonna see that it's the exact same thing as running this command. It just allows us to have a much cleaner syntax. So, all right, looks like this file is gonna be handy. Learn a new tool, make, everything's looking good. However, we still have these migration issues, and all right. So let's close out of this for now, since we got that make file written. All right, so before we get into any more tools or project setups, what I want to do is restructure the code base a bit. And the reason I want to do it right now is because whenever we go and set up these various tools, those tools are typically going to like reference locations or actually files, like lint this directory, or this is where my project settings are, so on and so forth. So I like to get my code base structured early on, because then you don't have to go back and like tweak all those file paths and whatnot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new package, and this package is going to be a lowercase version of whatever your actual project name is. So my project name is Core Tutorials. However, I am going to kind of break my own standard and just drop off that hyphen tutorials, because this is really just to indicate that this is like a tutorials project. However, in a non-tutorial project is what I was trying to say, we wouldn't have that. So just to keep things kind of as they would be in production, I'll just name it Core. And now what I want to do is I want to move this project package, which is the one that was created whenever we first started our project. I want to move that in here and just refactor that, and then also this manage.py. So basically all of the files that came whenever Django created that project for us, I'm just going to scope it under this core. And that's because I want to leave this top level directory mostly for like standard project files and tool configurations and files referencing the various tools that we're going to be using. I want to keep the application or business logic out of all this. I don't want it all scattered in together. So that's why I scope all of that under core. All right, so if we actually try to run the project right now, we're gonna get a couple issues. And okay, I can't find this file, yada yada. Okay, so basically what this is saying is since we moved all of those under basically to a new location, there are a couple places in Django where we need to just update some things. The first one is in this manage.py file. And this is just saying the Django settings module is no longer in a package called project settings, because in our top level, we don't have project anymore. It is now under core.project.settings. And also, if you go under project settings.py, let's see what we need to change here. So first of all, since we nested this file under one additional package, our base directory, we just have to add another parent since we're kind of like one more level deep. And now let's see what else needs change. Root URL config. Again, same thing is over here. Too lazy to type 5 characters. So that is now under core.projects.url. And then I believe that there might be one or two more. All right, WSGI application. Just add core right there. And okay, so I think that's all we needed to change. However, we will still get an issue if we just run this command still, even though we updated all our source code. And the reason for that is because in our Makefile, what we said is this command says to run a script called manage.py. And as you can see, that manage.py file is no longer in the same directory. So in order to update that, instead of running .manage.py, we can say run the module, if I can type, and the module, just a different syntax, is core.manage. And that's where this is, core.manage. All right, so once you have those updated, hopefully, unless I didn't miss anything, now when we run make run server, yes, we're still getting these migration issues, but we had those before. Point being is that now everything is updated and everything is working now that things have been shuffled around a bit. Good to go. All right, so now that that is looking good, let me actually close out of this for now. And I'm gonna be adding some more commands to this Makefile so I can go ahead and clear everything else out. And all right, so now I'm just kind of thinking through all the commands that I know 100% that I'm going to be basically running quite often in this project. The first one is to install the dependencies. So I'm just going to call it install, and I'll say poetry install. Essentially, this is kind of what I tell myself in the head. If in the terminal I'm using poetry a lot of the time and typing that in, then I probably want to make this a make command. So I know this is kind of a weird way to think of it, but I don't know, it just seems to work out. And okay, so install, poetry install, and now because I'm lazy, gonna copy this. And okay, what's another thing? Well, migrate. Migrate to get rid of those migration commands. And for this, actually gonna be copying this. So the command to run those migrations is just migrate, and then another command to actually make migrations. So I'll just name this migrations instead of make migrations because we can run it this way, like this, make migrations. But anyways, this is just going to be make migrations. And again, the difference between these two, just to skim on this real quick, is that whenever you have a change that's going to update one of your models, and in turn you need to update like your a database structure, you're going to make those migrations. Basically does the equivalent of generating a bunch of SQL commands, and then migrate actually runs those SQL commands against your database to actually do the updating. So these are the instructions, and this is how you actually like execute those instructions. All right, what else do we need? Run server, create super user. Going to be doing that. So I'll call this command super user. And we'll just say create super user. And then let's see, the last command I believe that we need for the time being is just a command that other developers can use whenever they need to update their own environment. So say that they pull down a branch from GitHub and there are, some changes, maybe some new packages that got added, and maybe some new migration files that they need to run to update their local database. Instead of typing all that and figuring it out, we're just gonna make a command called update. Now here, instead of just tapping down to a new line and writing the instructions, there's actually a pretty cool, I don't know what to call it, a trick, a new syntax that you can use, because what I want this update command to be is basically a combination. Actually, I'll write it the, not bad way, but I'll write it the long way, and then I'll shorten this up. So what we want to do is we want to first run the install command to run any of these, basically install any new dependencies. And then after that, what we want to do is we want to run migrate. And what this is going to do is it's going to say if there are any new migration files, then just go ahead and update the database. However, we see a lot of like repeated code, and these commands were already like shortened to this new syntax. So there must be a better way. And indeed there is. Instead of just copying the recipes from here and moving it down here, what we can do is write install and then migrate. And what this does, make sure you add a semicolon, actually a space then semicolon. What this does is whenever we run make update now, it's basically the same as running make install and then right after it running make migrate. So again, I want to keep our commands as efficient as possible, but yeah, I think this is all the commands that we need for now. And let's actually, now that we have this snazzy new, let me find it, wait for it. Now that we have this snazzy new make migrate command, let's go ahead and run that to hopefully get rid of some of these migration issues. So I'm gonna run make migrate, and then it looked like everything was migrated. Now I'm gonna go ahead and run make run server again, and if everything worked, we should see that these migration issues are no more. Let me just expand that. Make run server, and beautiful. So check it out. So now we have our project running, our command shortened, project structure looking good. And all right, let's just go ahead and close that. We aren't digging into the actual project, or don't care if it's running right now. So what next? Well, before we get into kind of the next stage of this Django project setup, I do want to make one additional update to this Makefile, and that is adding something called, I don't even know how to say it, adding a new syntax called phony. And I'll show you what it is, and then I'll talk about it. So if you write period, and then in capitals, PHONY, a semicolon, and then just write the name of your target right after it. And we're actually going to be doing this for all of these targets right here. I was going to say command target, don't know what to call them. But what the heck is going on right here? Well, check it out. Whenever you create a Makefile, make by default, it assumes that these targets right here, migrate, migrations, run server, it makes the assumption that these targets are actual files. However, when we were creating these, we didn't reference any file. For example, there's no file here called like migration. There's no file called super user, no file called update. So what's the deal? Like, what are we supposed to do? So what we want to do is essentially tell make that these commands right here, they're not files. We want to explicitly say that they're kind of just like custom commands that we built basically. And we want to do this for two reasons. The first one is actually to improve performance. And that is because whenever make is going to see this phony keyword, it knows, oh, okay, I don't have to check if there's a file called, install or migrate. I can just bypass that like file checking logic. And another thing is whenever you tag a target is phony, then it avoids a conflict in case there is indeed a file with the same name. And I say that because sometimes, let's say there could be indeed some script in here called update and a file called update, and it might be like a shell script responsible for updating, I don't know, updating something. However, if we tag this target is phony, we're just gonna say this update is phony right here, then even if there was a file called update right here, then it wouldn't even look at it or try to run it or anything like that. It would just bypass that and say, okay, this command is what you're trying to execute. So either way, we're just gonna go ahead and tag everything is phony. All right, we got some phony migrations here. Run server, also phony, meaning it is not an actual file. And the super user target right here, yes, this is all phony. Everything is phony. And all right, this looks good. And by the way, right now, whenever we run these commands, it's going to make no difference whatsoever. However, just internally know that since we tagged our targets phony, it just improves performance in a bit. And yeah, we get all those benefits. So that's what phony does, and those, I believe, are the only changes I wanted to make to this Makefile right now. So now let's go ahead and move on. All right, so let's close this Makefile, and now what we can do is we can start on settings management. So as our project scales, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we keep all of our settings. If I can pop it open, we need to make sure that we can keep all of these settings organized. Now, right now, it doesn't look that bad. I mean, not that many settings. You only got like 100 lines or so. But as we scale, as we add more packages, as we need to configure our testing, Docker, Django REST framework needs settings that we're going to need to add, then this file can get pretty beefy. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a way that we can kind of break this up a little bit easier. Now, thankfully, a lot of other people had this issue too. So they already have a couple packages. The one that we're going to be using is, or adding, I should say, if I'm going to type in the add keyword, is Django split settings. And before we even install that, I'll show you what it is. It has a pretty good, nice short description. So this package allows you to organize Django settings into multiple files and directories, easily override and modify settings, and use wildcard, yada yada. So this is kind of the meat of it, and yeah, that kind of sounds exactly what we were going for. So we're going to be using that in another, not really important one, I would say, but we are going to be using something from PyYAML as well. So just go ahead and add these two. And again, when you add them, it automatically installs them as well. So we don't need to run poetry install or make install separately. Now, just to verify that, okay, we now have Django split settings in PyYAML in our project, good to go. So what are we going to be doing after this? Well, Django split settings, as we saw, it allows us to kind of break up this single settings file into multiple different ones. And since we're going to have multiple settings files, we should probably create a new package for that. So go ahead inside your project where this settings module is, just go ahead and create a new package, and we're going to be calling this settings. So basically converting this file to a little package right here. Now inside here, we can actually create a new directory. We don't need to make this a Python package. We can just use a directory. And I'm just going to call this template, TMPLATS. Always double check, make sure you spelled everything correctly. And actually, let me add one more file, and then I'll kind of talk through what the heck I'm doing here. So in here, I'm going to add a Python file, which is kind of weird because it's a directory and not a package, but it's just going to be like a template sample file. So I'm going to call this settings.dev.py. All right, so what's going on with this structure? All right, you know what? Actually, let me do one more thing, and that is I'm going to rename the settings file, refactor rename. I'm going to rename this to base.py. since these are indeed like our base settings. I'm going to move this in this new settings package. All right, so now we got everything structured. So let's go ahead and talk about this structure real quick. So all of the settings are going to be in this package called settings. And even though we have this one base file right now, we're going to be breaking this up and pretty much creating more settings files in here. We're going to have one for our base settings, which are like the core Django settings. We'll keep it this kind of as is. And then let's say that we want to set up our settings for Django REST framework. We're going to be adding another file for that. We're going to be adding one for Docker, one for like environment variables. We're going to be adding more settings in here. That's all you need to know. And it's like a monster truck racing outside. And it's just a cool way that you can break them up, keep things a little bit more organized. Now this templates right here in this settings.dev.py, this is going to be each developer's like local settings. So let's say one developer wanted to change their logging. They prefer things to be logged out in a certain way, or maybe they wanted to switch to a new database to try something out. What we're going to be doing is basically creating a template file right here. However, they just don't want to be editing this and each person pushing it up to GitHub. So it's just going to be a template. What they're going to do as part of the project setup is clone or copy this over to a separate location that basically doesn't get checked into Git. And then each developer can kind of customize their own settings. The template stays as is, and all of the global settings that we need for every environment, such as the base, Django REST framework, so on and so forth, those will stay as is. And if that's all confusing and it's like, it's easier just to see this than to explain it. But I did want to, kind of give you an overview of what's going on. So, I don't know, just think it's easier that way. All right, so what to do next? So let's do this. In settings, init py, I'm actually gonna go ahead and move this right here over. And I actually need both of these. I believe that's the only, yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy. Actually, let me go ahead and do it this way. I'm gonna cut this, and in settings py, paste that in. I'm also gonna cut this since I need that. And let me go ahead and really remove a lot of this. Okay, let me just clean out some of these comments since it's getting a bit tricky to read all this. All right, so in this settings.init, it's going to be where we're going to kind of aggregate everything. So everywhere else that was importing from the settings module, it can kind of do it the same way. And we'll be getting into the setting up of those other files in just a second. But for right now, I just want to fix a couple things that kind of broke in this reshuffle. The first thing is that since the path of this file, where we're specifying this base directory, it was in a settings module directly under projects, but since we created this new module and nested it under there, we just need to add one more parent right here to make sure we got the right path. Now, after this, what I want to do is hop back in base and set up a couple things. Let me get rid of these comments too, so y'all know what I'm doing. And actually, I always like to keep things very alphabetized. I don't know, my OCD or something. But either way, what I'm gonna do is actually copy these over, and I'm gonna stick these in these dev setting template right here, because I want these values by default. I want debug to be equal to false. And this pretty much says we're in production mode by default. And I say this because it's just safer to do this way, because then in your development modes, you can easily turn on debug. It's just better this way in case, let's say you forget to make it false, then you have all these logs and security issues popping up. And yeah, so for secret key also, I'm just gonna set this to not implemented. All right. So now by default, we are in production mode. We have to manually overwrite that for development environment. That's exactly what we want. And by default as well, the secret key is not implemented. And wouldn't this throw an error? By default, yes. And that's exactly what we want, because any environment you run this is basically saying, hey, you need to provide the secret key. And this just helps to make sure like no secret keys are checked into Git or anything like that. And all right, so these are going to be our overrides for local environment. However, one other thing that I want to do is this database path is broken right now. And that's because, remember, we removed this base.dir setting from this base.py file, and we moved it over to init, and we're going to kind of see how everything hooks together in just a second. But for right now, I'm not going to really worry about that, because we're actually going to be replacing SQLite with Postgres. And just to show you how to set up an actual database, however, if you use, well, really any other database, MySQL, Mongo even, is going to be all the same. However, I just want to get this kind of like working for right now so we can kind of move on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy, I always forget where it is. Okay, copy path reference and just say absolute path. So again, this is kind of a hacky way for right now, but like I said, we're going to be deleting this soon. Just want to make sure that our project is still going to be able to run while we set up everything else. So I copied an absolute path to this. Wherever your DB SQLite database is, go ahead and paste it in for there. Now, next up, let's see what else we need to do. Got these overrides right here. So what we're going to be doing, remember, these are like the global settings that developers basically shouldn't be messing with. They're going to be set up once and you more or less don't touch them. The developer's custom settings are by default specified in this templates file. However, we don't want developers to be messing with these explicitly either. This is just a template to show developers what they need to fill out. However, what do they do whenever they actually want to change their settings? Well, what we are going to be doing is we first are going to be making a directory right here called local, and just do it from my terminal. It's probably always cool to learn some new commands if you don't know. So I'm going to be making a directory called local. And now you can see we have this local directory right here. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be copying over, probably shouldn't have minimized that, but I'm going to be copying over the settings from this template file to my local directory right here. So how do we do that? Well, let me just scroll down a little bit. If you do CP, I'm going to copy it from, it's in core, and then it's in project, settings, templates, and then it's settings.dev.py. Where do I want to copy it to? Well, the current directory, there's a directory called local, and I just want to basically name it the same thing, settings.dev.py. And I'm gonna run that, and now we should see that this file, which was in the templates directory, is now in my local /settings.dev.py. And by the way, the reason that I also like to run these commands rather than just saying go ahead and right click and new file, this and that, is because now what I can do is copy these and stick them in the README. Pull that open, and we're going to be cleaning all this up in a bit as well. I just want to kind of pretty much make sure I don't forget anything. So okay, so as part of the project setup, we're going to be running these commands, and I'll show you how to kind of format this so it looks like code and make everything prettier. But for right now, like I said, it's just kind of a placeholder. So okay, so now we have our basic, pretty much all of our basic settings structure set up. However, things aren't really tied together anyway. For example, we didn't really specify, hey, whenever we run our project, we want to first pull all these and then apply any overrides, yada, yada. So how do we do that? Well, in order to specify everything exactly how we want, we need to write a couple custom functions for ourselves that are going to help with this entire process. Now for these utility functions, I don't want to stick them under this settings package. What I want to do is I want to create another package right alongside this projects package. And even though it's kind of weird right now, but this, you can name it core, since we're going to be putting quite a few things in here, and they're kind of like core, you'll kind of see they're like core functionality. Oh, we could almost name this general, since this functionality is going to be general to really this entire project. A lot of reusable generic functionality, but either way, inside here, I'm just going to make another package called utils, and let me close out everything else right now. So in here, we're going to have the first thing that we're going to write inside a module called collections. And the one function that we're going to be writing right now is a function to basically allow us to pass in two dictionaries. One is like the original dict, and the other one are your new values. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically a way to update a dictionary, but we update it in a way that if there are any nested dictionaries or nested values, those get updated as well. And the reason that we're going to be doing this, just as a little kind of give you some meaning behind everything, is let's say that we are in, okay, so let's say we want to update our database settings. Now right now we only have a couple levels right here. This is our default database, the engine, we're using SQLite, but we're going to be changing it to Postgres. And let's say that you wanted to change the name of the database or the password or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. Well, what this function that we're going to write is going to allow us to do is it allows us to pass in certain keys, even if they're deeply nested, and it's just going to update those values rather than having to like recreate this entire thing on an outer scope and then pass it in. It's probably easier just to kind of write this out. So I'm going to create a function called deep update, and we're going to be passing in the base dict or the original dict, and we'll say update with, which is going to be the new dictionary. And I'll just write a comment what we're going to do. Actually, I don't need a comment. I'm commenting with my voice right now. So the way that we're going to do this is pretty much iterate over this new dictionary, the new values that we want. And for each of those items, we're basically going to apply the new values to the original dictionary. So we'll see how this is done for key value in update with dot items. Go ahead and first we need to check if the value that we're trying to apply is a dictionary itself. So we'll say if is instance, and what is an instance? Well, check the value, and then we're going to check if it's a dictionary. Now, if so, what we want to do is we want to get the value from basically the base dict. And so base dict value, the equivalent value, and that's equal to the base dict dot get key. All right, so we're saying that if the value from the new dictionary is indeed a dictionary, then the first thing we want to do is get like the equivalent value from the base dictionary. And what we want to do here is we want to check if the original value is also a dictionary. Because if the original value and the new value are both dictionaries, then what we're going to do is we're going to update, basically run the same function again, basically creating a recursive function right now. Now, if the original value is not a dictionary, then we're just going to set it to the new value. And you guys, that's a lot to take in. In about 2 seconds, you're going to see what's going on. So if is instance, that base dict value, we want to check if this is a dictionary as well. Then we're just going to call deep update, and this is going to take the base dict value and that new value, referencing this right here, and we can just say else. If it is not a dict, then what we want to do is just update the base dict key with that new value. All right, pretty cool. So this was for this item saying what to do if it is a dict. However, now we can say what to do if the new value is not a dict. And in that case, what we want to do is just say the base dict. Actually, we can just copy this. All right, right like that. And the last thing that we need to do is just return the base dict, since this is essentially the goal of it, to update this base dict with the nested values. All right, so let me just make sure, iterate over the new dictionary, check if the value is a dict, and then compare it with the base value. If it's a dict, update it again, and follow throughs, just update it. Okay. Actually, let me pause this and just add some comments real quick. All right, I add some comments, so whenever I push this up to GitHub, if you're peeking back at it later on, then yeah, you don't have to watch this whole tutorial again, unless you wanna. That's cool too. All right, so we got this utility function written. Now, another thing that we're gonna need is, well, might as well just write it. So I'm gonna create a new file called miscellaneous. And in here, we're gonna be making that YAML function. And well, let me just go ahead and get things started. So YAML, and by that YAML function, I mean back here, remember when we added this PyYAML? Well, this needs to be installed for this YAML package right here. But either way, what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna write a function called YAML coerce. How do you even say that? Who knows? Coerce. All right. And in here, what this is going to allow is basically us to pass in a string dictionary, and it's going to convert it to proper Python. Now, we named this YAML coerce because by default, this functionality is kind of for loading in YAML, which we can probably set up this way. I don't use it, but either way, actually, let me show you why this is useful, and it's going to make sense in a bit. So check this out. So let's go back to our database example and say that we are writing a Docker file. However, we want to override our database. Let's say we're getting ready to deploy to production, and our production database has a new name, a new user, a new password. Well, in our Docker file, it doesn't take Python syntax. In fact, our Docker file, it doesn't give us a whole lot of flexibility. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how we can use this like a nested dictionary in a Docker file. So what we're going to be doing is we're basically going to be stringifying everything. So in our Docker file, we just have one long string that's basically going to resemble this dictionary, something like this. Right here, well, no, I'm getting yelled at by my IDE, but we can basically pass in an entire nested dictionary as a string. And then what this is going to do is basically convert that to a Python dictionary. So it's just super easy to do it this way. Convert the value to proper Python. Actually, let me add that comment. That's all this function is going to do. And now I'll show you how to do this. We'll say if is instance, we just want to check if that value is a string. And then if so, we're just going to return YAML.load. And what we can do is we're gonna create basically a tiny bit of YAML and then just convert it to Python super quick. So we'll say if you can do it the shorthand value, since we can use F strings now. So what we can do is we're just going to be creating this tiny snippet of YAML under the key of dummy. And then once we do that, we can load it in, or basically convert it. So I'm going to say the loader is equal to YAML.safe loader. There we go. And what value are we trying to pick off from this? Dummy right here. Now, if it's not a string, then we can just go ahead and return the value. And all right, so I believe that's all we need. So basically, whenever we get passed in a string that references a nested dictionary, it's basically going to convert it to YAML, which is going to convert it to Python, and then we're just going to be returning the value from it, which is now the Python value. And actually, let me pause this and add a comment so all of that makes sense as well. All right, so I added some comments. YAML load returns a Python object. So this is going to return a Python object. And I also gave a little example of when we're actually going to be using this, basically to convert a string dictionary, such as this right here, to an actual Python dict. And I also added this comment right here. It's useful because sometimes we need the stringify settings this way, such as in Docker files. It doesn't like Python, but it loves strings. So basically to convert these to Python that we can use. And by the way, I know just creating a bunch of these utility functions and not really seeing how they fit into our settings is a little bit confusing right now. But I do want to say that we do have one more utility function to write. And in about 10 minutes, we're going to see how everything is going to come together to create this beautiful settings management system, or at least I think it's beautiful. So just bear with me a little bit longer and less, I'll say maybe utility settings that file that we're going to write. I can't even talk anymore. Inside utils, just write settings.py, and one small function can import OS. And then I'm also going to import, like it's structuring this way. I also want to import this function right here, and you'll see why in just a second. So from miss import YAML course. And all right, so the function that I'm going to be creating right now is going to basically pull any specific environment variables from the actual system environment so we can use those. Now, why would we want to do this? It's because whenever we are, well, there's probably a couple of different places, but the one I can remember right now is that whenever we are going to be setting up and Dockerizing this project, we want to be able to set environment variables from our Docker container. Now, those are basically the equivalent of setting system environment variables like I would do like right here in my terminal. Now, we want to say if there are any relevant environment variables from the overall parent system, like just locally or Docker container or whatever, pull those out and apply them to this project. Now, what we want to be sure of is it's just not pulling all of our environment variables, because we may have some for other projects, or we may have some for other applications, or we may have some environment variables that we're just like playing around with something. We don't just want to pull everything in from our environment and just like blindly apply it to our project. So how do we kind of handle this? Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be namespacing our own custom environment variables from the system. And what we can do is we can just say that whenever we have an environment variable, and it's typically named the name of your project and just something like settings, whenever we have an environment variable like in Docker is one that we're going to be using, or we can say something like, I don't know, even like a DB name, something like that. Basically, we're going to be looking for any system environment variables that are prefixed with this prefix, and we're going to be making it a constant so we don't have to actually type the string out every time. But we're going to be looking for these specific environment variables, and if we find any, then we're just going to strip this away, and that this becomes what gets applied. So it's kind of weird just to explain, but just to kind of give some meaning behind this function right now. So I'm going to say get settings from environment, and I'm also just going to pass in the prefix right here to keep this function rather generic. And then remember, what we're going to be needing to do is kind of slice off that prefix, because what comes after that first underscore is like the actual name of the environment variable or how we want to treat it. So in order to do this, I'll just say prefix.length is equal to the length of the prefix, just so we know how much text to slice off. And what this function is going to be returning is a new dictionary, and it's basically going to be a dictionary of all your cleaned up environment variables without that core setting underscore prefix. So the key of this new dictionary is going to just be equal to prefix length, and the value, we'll say this, YAML course value. And for this, we're going to be, actually, it probably makes more sense if I just write it this way. So for key value in os.environment items, so basically iterate through all of your environment variables, and for each of those, check if the key starts with, thought I was going to get some autocomplete there, prefix. All right, so we're going to be passing in that prefix, and if any of our environment variables start with that prefix, then just filter those out, and that is why I typed the value right here. Let me actually minimize this. All right, so now we can kind of see what's going on. So again, the prefix that we're going to be passing in, this is just dummy code right here, but it's going to be something like core settings underscore. So again, it's going to iterate through all of the environment variables, check the ones that start with this prefix, and let's say that there's a environment variable called this. What it's going to do is it's going to, actually might as well do this. Let's say that we have an environment variable called core settings in Docker1. What this is going to return is a dictionary whose value is in Docker, or excuse me, the key is in Docker and the value is 1. So convert this to a dictionary of these. That's all it's doing. All right, so now that we got all of our boring utility functions out of the way, let's go ahead and close all those and hop into the good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean seeing how all of this fits together. So in settings init py, remember this is kind of where we're going to aggregate really all of this logic. So the first thing that we need to do is import a couple things, and that's os.path, and then we'll say, actually from pathlib, got path, and what else do we need? Okay, so you know that split settings package that we download that I said that it's a way to kind of aggregate multiple settings files into one? Well, we are going to need some things from that. So from split settings.tools, we're going to import include, and we also are going to import optional. And what this include is going to be is it's going to take however many arguments you pass in. You're basically going to be passing a bunch of settings file, like file 1, file 2, so on and so forth, and it's going to aggregate them together. In this optional one right here, this keyword is saying that if you have a file like file 3 in here and it's labeled as optional, this means that this file may exist or it may not exist. So we actually are going to be using this to specify this local settings file right here. Since if developers don't have any of their own local settings files, then that's fine. But yeah, that's basically the syntax of it. So, okay, what else are we gonna need? So let me remove this right now. These bugs are kind of annoying me. So another thing that we want is to create a constant for that prefix. So let me actually add a comment. R. And again, for you probably want to change the value of this to be different depending on the actual name of your project. But for me, I'm just going to name this env var environment variable settings prefix. And for the value, I'll just say core settings underscore. So again, whenever we have an environment variable that we want to be pulled in from basically the parent system, whether it's Docker or my actual system I'm developing on, which is not going to be too common, but hey, who knows? We just need to make sure to prefix it with this string of text right here. Now, before we get into actually aggregating all these files and so on and so forth, I also want to make another constant for a local settings path. So local settings path, and I'm just going to say this is equal to os.get from the environment, and I'll make it an F string. So this path right here, we are going to allow the developers to specify their own settings file, and that's because by default we can just assume that it is in this location. But let's say that they wanted to test something out, but they didn't want to update this file right here. Maybe they just wanted to create a similar file for like testing a new database or logging something differently, so on and so forth. And to avoid, having to comment this out and create new ones, so on and so forth, we can just allow them to create a new file and just update the path of where the local development settings are. And we'll say that, again, this is going to be optional as well, but we'll say that if they have a custom one, then just go ahead and it's going to be local. Actually, this is this right here. So if they do have a custom local settings file, then they're going to be passing in an environment variable telling us where it is. And it's basically going to be, this is going to be the value, or excuse me, this is going to be the key, and then the path is going to be the value. But yeah, we'll just reference this right here. And now what we need to say is if there is not a local settings path, and there's not going to be one the majority of the time, because they're just going to be using this one by default, what we can say is that the local settings path is just equal to local/settings. Actually, let me just copy this name so I'll make sure I don't refactor, rename. This is what I do whenever I need to copy this name. Pretty sure there's an easier way, but there you go. All right, so if they don't give us a custom settings path or a settings file, then we'll just assume that they want to use this one right here. And after this, what we can do now is just to make sure that the paths are always formatted consistently, we can check if the settings path is a relative path or an absolute one. And if it's relative, we're just going to convert it to absolute. So from there forward, we're just always working with a standardized absolute path to whatever settings file that we need. All right, so we'll say if the local settings path is not absolute by saying if not os.path.isAbs. Why didn't that autocomplete? It's kind of scaring me now. All right, if the local settings path is not absolute, then what we're going to do is just update it. So we have the base directory and then the local settings path. All right, so if the local settings path is not absolute, then just go ahead and prefix it with our base directory, which is this right here. That's essentially going to convert it to an absolute path. And yeah, I think we're good to go now. All right, so the last command that we need is that include function right here. And again, like I said, what this is going to do is allow us to include various settings files, and it's going to aggregate it as one. Now, right now, the only settings files that we have is this base.py settings file, and also this custom. Should I organize it like this? All right, and also this custom like local development settings file right there. So no matter what, we always want to include base.py. It's always going to be there. No developer's ever supposed to delete it or anything. So we can just write that in just like that. Now after this, we want to go ahead and write an optional local settings path, because like I said, This may exist, it may not. Either way, check if there is one, and if so, just include it. And that should be all good to go right there. And we do have some additional, let me think about this. So we're going to be making a custom environment variables in Docker, but I think we can actually test this out right now. And in order, I like this here for some reason. In order to test this real quick, let me just, where do I want to go? I'm just go to my URLs, since this is going to load after the settings. And I'm just going to write some quick dummy code just to make sure that the settings are being pulled in correctly. And that is from Django.configuration. I just want to import settings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out settings.debug. And let me just print out this secret key as well. Usually don't want to do this, especially on YouTube, but well, I'm not actually going to be deploying this project or anything. So, okay. Now the reason that I want to test it right now is because everything, I believe, should be hooked up where we're basically saying that these are our base settings that we're going to be using for every environment. Now, for these base settings, since we had base and then after, we're including this local settings path, which is this right here. We're basically going to be overriding or adding any of the settings to base that are in here. So if everything worked properly, this debug, which was false by default in a way, should be true now. And the secret key, which is not implemented because we want each environment to implement their own explicitly. So if everything's working correctly, then when I run this, I should see that debug is true. And that secret key is this, ends in TEH. So let's just go ahead and test that out right now. Make run server, and okay, true, and that this ends in TEH. Beautiful. All right, so those settings are good to go. Any developer can just go ahead and tweak their own. Actually, did I include this in my git ignore? Make sure. All right. So let me, where to go from here? No. Okay, I mean, I always like to keep stuff nice and clean. I can't believe when I see people on Chrome and they have like 60 tabs open, I'm like, oh man, I just want to steal their computer and close all their tabs. But all right, let's see. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to add another settings file right next to base, and I'm going to call this custom. Okay, so what is going to go in here? Well, let me actually add a comment, and I'll say settings specific to this application only. And by this, I'll specify, I'll specify that this means no Django or third-party settings. All right, so as our project scales, we're going to have more settings in addition to this. Pretty soon we're going to be setting up settings for like Django filters, Django REST framework, Docker, so on and so forth. A lot of Django related packages though. And in addition to that, we're also going to want global settings just for our project. And by that, I mean like, let's say we're making like a store. We'll say like I don't know, this would be stupid, but I can't think of anything else right now. Like maybe the tax. Like, so tax is like 0.07%, or we'll say the global color theme or something like that. Basically, any environment variables that are only going to be in this app and really not like every single Django app out there. So one thing that I want to specify in here by default is in Docker, I'm going to be setting this to false. So by default, whenever we're running this, we're going to basically be telling our project that you are not running in a Docker environment. And that's just because kind of throughout our project, some things are going to be different if you're in Docker and if you're running it outside of Docker. So yeah, it's just that flag is going to come in handy quite a bit. So either way, now that we have this additional settings file, it's pretty bare bones right now, but we need to make sure that we include it right here. So custom.py, again, these are our base Django settings, and these are our custom application settings. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to create an additional settings file, and remember these utility functions that created. For example, we created this function to pull all of those environment variables and kind of apply those or convert them to a dictionary right here. And that we also wrote this deep update to update one dictionary with another dictionary. Well, now we're going to see why these are coming in handy. So I'm going to name this file again under here as well, under settings. I'm going to create a new Python file, and I'm going to name it envars, envvars.py. And what this is going to do is it's going to use actually those two functions that we just talked about. So let me import those first. core.core.utils.collections, deep update, and from core utils.settings, we want to import get settings from environment. There's a plane flying out. Okay, so actually let me pause it and let me pause this video and add a comment, and it's just going to be a lot more clear what's going on. All right, so here's a little cheat sheet of what is going on in the logic that we're going to be writing right here. And by the way, this is only going to be one line of code, so not that much. But basically what the logic we're going to be writing is going to do is it's going to look for any environment variables that are prefixed with this specific prefix. Again, this is going to be different depending on your project, but it's going to be looking for these environment variables, and then whenever it finds one, it's going to be stripping this off, and it's going to be essentially converting any of these values to Python and then applying it to our globals, which is just a dictionary of your global variables, basically converting this into a global variable or a regular setting that our project can use. And actually, let me specify this real quick. So I'll say globals. This is variables. It's not really that, well, I don't want to say not that common, but just a little helper. All right. So how do we do this? How do we update our globals with these, nice, clean, updated settings? Well, if we do deep update, again, let's go ahead and look at the signature for this. So whenever we update something, we're going to be passing in we'll say original dictionary, and then the new dictionary that we want to basically apply to this original one. So this original one are just our global variables. And again, this is something that's built in with Python. And how do we get that new cleaned up Python dict? What we do is we use this function, get settings from environment. We'll take a look at the signature for this right here. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull all those settings from our environment, clean them up, and then return a nice Python value. And again, this is where if we pass in like a string dictionary, is going to convert it to a Python dictionary. But basically all of that we wrote already. And the last thing that we actually need to pass in this get settings from environment is we need to pass in the prefix. And what is this prefix? It's this right here. So we're going to be passing that in right here. Now, actually, this is another interesting thing. Let me actually update this real quick. So right after this local settings path, what we can do is we want to include this file right here, which is our environment variable settings, envvars.py, envvars.py. All right. So we are basically telling Django, whenever you're setting up our project, configuring all the settings, first load in base.py. Let me close these other files. First load in base.py, which are your base Django settings, then load in any custom settings that are specific to this application only. After that, apply any local settings, pretty much just that, local settings from that specific developer. And then after this, look for the system environment variables, which are right here, and convert these to settings, basically standard settings that we can use throughout the project. Now, what we see here is something pretty interesting, and that is we are including this envar settings prefix, but we didn't import it. So is this going to break? Well, believe it or not, it is not going to. Why is that? It is because even though we didn't import it from this file, whenever this include, or excuse me, I'll say it like this. Whenever split settings is patching together like this master setting structure, what it basically does is this. It's going to go one by one and say, okay, what's in base.py? Okay, I'm more or less going to copy everything here and just keep it in memory for a second. Now, what's the next thing you want me to apply? Well, it's this custom settings right here. So it basically takes every setting that it already has in memory, which is basically all of the ones from base.py, and it more or less like pastes it above here. So I say that because if there anything in this file that references any of these, then that's fine. So we may get some syntax issues because the IDE doesn't really like it, but that's essentially what's happening. So by the time we get to this envars.py file right here, we can actually use any of the settings from here, and actually even the ones from in here. You can imagine that all of that's kind of copied, and if we pasted all of those above here, then those can get applied to here too. So as part of this, it also includes this right here. So long story short, all of this is kind of already included in here. However, even though we can write it this way, my IDE just doesn't really like it because it doesn't know what split settings is doing behind the scenes. So just so I can avoid this and not always have this error in my IDE telling me I did something wrong when really it's like supposed to be set up this way, I'm just gonna have type ignore and then basically just telling my IDE to ignore this. This is actually how I want it. It's not an issue. There you go. But yeah, just kind of know that whenever you're applying your settings behind the scenes, it kind of applies them in aggregate like that, one by one, so you don't always have to import everything. And now this, I believe, is good to go. Let me just go ahead and run this real quick just to make sure that nothing broke. So make run server, and okay, I still have those print statements that I probably want to get rid of. Let me actually do that right now. Those are in our URLs. We verified that that's working. Don't need to test those anymore. And all right. Now the last thing that we want to do is we want to add one more settings file for now, and that is our Docker settings. And this settings file is going to be pretty lean right now since we don't even have Docker set up. However, I do just want to have it in here just to get our, kind of our settings structure finalized. But either way, go ahead and create a new settings file, and let me clean some of this up. Let's keep base in here. I'm going to show you guys something in a second. But either way, create a new settings file. We're just going to call it Docker. And what can we do right now? Well, check it out. So we're actually going to be using this exact environment variable. So by the time we get to, actually, let me do it like this. So we are going to include the Docker settings right after this envars right here. Let me pull this out in order. So we're going to be loading in base, then envars, Docker, some other ones, but that's the order we're going to be using. So by the time we get to Docker, these environment variables are essentially going to be converted to globals, so we can more or less just reference this name from this Docker file. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we can say something like if Docker, and again, we have that issue with the IDE not liking it because we didn't import it, even though split settings kind of like imported everything behind the scenes manually. So for here, we're just gonna make a simple check, and what we're gonna be checking is that if we are running this project in Docker mode, and we're gonna be deploying this in Docker, by the way, but either way, I say this because, where's my middleware? Okay, whenever we're running in Docker mode, one thing that we wanna do is we wanna make sure that, well, not only this package right here, but possibly some other middleware is included. But either way, the logic I'm going to be writing is if you're in Docker, then we need to make sure that we're running this middleware. So how do we do this? Well, let me just go ahead and copy that. And I'll say we want to assert or make sure that middleware, the beginning of it, is exactly equal to this. All right. So we're getting a few warnings from the IDE because it's saying, hey, I don't know what in Docker is. You're not importing anywhere. And also, what the heck is this middleware? However, all of this is going to be included because this middleware is going to come from the base settings, and the Docker is going to come from our environment variables. And both of those are going to be included by the time we get to this Docker file. And then we're just going to test that the basically, this is just saying that this is included in the first section of the middleware list. All right, so actually, let me do something else too, just to kind of test this out. Okay, so if we are in Docker, and I'm going to delete this in just a second, I'll say running in Docker mode. Actually, running in Docker. I don't know why that bothers me. I'm going to delete it in about 2 seconds, but just to show you guys that everything is working. When we are running in Docker mode, we're just going to log this out since, you know, this doesn't give us any indication if it worked or not. So now everything looks set up properly. The first thing I'm going to do after this is just run this real quick. And okay, I don't see anything running in Docker, and that is expected because we actually didn't set that environment variable anywhere. However, the rest of the project looked like it's all working. Nothing is broken, at least. So the last thing we have to do for now is just go ahead and actually let me pause my video and set this environment variable. I actually don't want to do it on screen just because you guys are going to see all my other environment variables. I'm sure I have a bunch of secret keys in there and whatnot. So let me just go ahead and pause this real quick, and I'll set this environment variable in my own local system, and then we'll make sure that everything is working correctly. So 1 second. All right, so what I did is I went ahead and I updated my system, or my Macs, in environment variables. And I also, when I was testing this, I did see that I had one little typo, not really a typo for our code, but in this comment right here, just in case you're following along line by line, I had core setting, singular, not plural. However, it's supposed to be core settings with an S. So just updating this comment right here. However, now let me go ahead and make run server, and we can now see it is indeed running in Docker mode. So Docker settings, everything is, you know, up and running correctly. So what I'm going to do right now is just remove that, since we don't actually need that. And now that we verified that yes, this is working correctly, our utility functions are pulling in the values correctly from our environment. It's stripping out this prefix correctly, converting these to global values that are valid Python, and all of our settings are pretty much set up. Again, like I said, as we install more packages and our application begins to scale, we are gonna likely need to add additional settings file, almost certainly. However, for right now, this is the basic structure. So you know what, this is probably good for this video too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure to remove that in Docker environment variable, and then in the next video, just making sure we don't need to cover anything else right now. So in the next video, we're going to be, well, we got a lot more to cover actually, in terms of Flake8, linting, MyPy, editor config, pre-commit, and also we will set up some logging middleware. We're going to be setting up PyTest. We are going to be setting up Docker. We talked about Docker a lot and didn't even set it up yet. And then adding a license, that's going to take like 2 seconds. Setting up Postgres, and then after all that, we are going to be learning how to set up some CI/CD and actually deploy this to AWS, getting a domain name, setting up SSL, and yeah, pretty much doing everything like we would do for a production grade actual Django project. So yeah, we got a lot to cover, but for now, I think that's a good place to stop the video. Thank you for watching, and I will see y'all later.